Good evening from Winnipeg. Dear audience of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Canada, I welcome all of you to today's webinar, episode number 8, and it is titled Progress Towards Peace Pathways for Negotiation and Transformation of the Conflict in Myanmar. This webinar is part of our ongoing series under the Global Affairs Canada funded project Charting a Lasting Peace in Myanmar. As many of you already know, this initiative is built upon the conviction that academic inquiry, civil society engagement, and collaborative dialogue are indispensable tools in the search for sustainable peace. You can learn more about the broader project on our website www.cric.org/project, where we continue to document and share our fieldwork, analysis, and stakeholders consultation across ASEAN and beyond. Before I formally start the webinar session this evening, let me do the treaty recognition. This institute is based on the original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We all are bound together in the true spirit of truth and reconciliation, and we live together in this treaty land. Dear audience, we live and work in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And today, as we speak and organize this webinar, let me take this opportunity to express our solidarity for the evacuees of one of the largest forest fire evacuation that is happening now in Manitoba. Approximately 17,000 Manitobans are evacuated from the northern side, and many of them have taken shelter in Winnipeg. Our government is doing their best in terms of accommodation, but through this platform and today, I also urge from the Institute that please open your doors, open your wallet, and whatever you can to support and help fellow citizens, those who are in distress. With this a little bit of appeal today for the forest fire evacuees, dear audience, let me introduce and get into the topic today. Today's discussion centers on the evolving dynamics of the protracted conflict in Myanmar and the concrete opportunities for negotiated transformation. In a landscape marked by military authoritarianism, fractured resistance movements, and widespread human suffering, identifying viable pathways to peace demands not only intellectual clarity but also political imagination grounded in real world practice. To help us navigate this complex terrain, we are honored to welcome Maria Cristina Cifuentes, a globally recognized peace-building specialist and climate policy negotiator from Colombia. She is also a Rotary Peace Fellow. Ms. Cifuentes brings to this dialogue a rare confluence of expertise in international relations, security studies, environmental governance, and multilateral negotiation. A Rotary Peace Fellow, as I said, from the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. She currently serves as a lead advisor at the Colombian Ministry of Environment, where she coordinates Colombia's national strategy on just transition under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But beyond her governmental role, Maria Cristina is also the creator of Peace Progress Analytical Framework, a multidimensional tool that integrates international metrics of positive peace, human security, and transformative governance. This framework has been utilized not only in national public policy, but also in simulated peace negotiation environments, including Smart Settles conflict resolution platform, which we are going to use extensively in our project. What makes her contribution particularly timely and relevant to today's topic is her ability to bridge climate action, conflict transformation, and systematic governance reform. Recognized globally as a Rotary People of Action champion of peace, she continues to engage in leading global dialogues around transitional justice, resilience, and inclusive peace building. In our session today, the audience, Maria Cristina will draw upon her analytical framework and professional insights to reflect on the present impasse in Myanmar and discuss what meaningful pathways might still exist for negotiated transformation, even amid deep-seated polarization and geopolitical inertia. Before I turn it over to our distinguished speaker, a quick reminder to our participants, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session, and you can do that from your respective social media feeds, because we are live broadcasting in our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, and a LinkedIn page. And we'll reserve some time after the presentation for an interactive discussion. And here I'm also very privileged today to have with us our founder advisor, David Gerald Newman, and also our founder director, Dr. Hilal Mohiuddin. Their presence really will enlighten us during the Q&A period. With that, it is my great privilege to invite Ms. Maria Cristina Cifuentes to share her presentation and insights. Maria, floor is yours, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes, now. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is it working well? Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm truly honored to be part of this powerful series and deeply grateful to the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute of Canada. My name is Cristina, and I'm a peace building specialist and climate policy negotiator from Colombia, where I serve as a national advisor on just transition at the Ministry of Environment. And as it was said, my work lies at the intersection of peace, systemic change, and the multilateral dialogue that we used to have at the governmental and also non-governmental level. I have had the honor to bring those tools to both policymaking and conflict affected territories. And today's session will focus on a question that I believe is essential. How do we move from understanding conflict to designing transformation? And more importantly, how do we do it in a way that is rooted in the realities of people, power, structures, and hope? I will be sharing with you the framework I have developed called the Peace Framework Analytical to promote progress towards more peaceful societies in fragile states and highly contested contexts. And I have used this framework I designed through my master degree in different scenarios. So I had the opportunity to introduce this approach into the NDC of Colombia, and nowadays in the Smart City main tool of analysis and modelation of international conflicts. That it's the special focus of the conversation of today, that we are going to see the implementation of this framework in the case study of Myanmar, with both strategic clarity and the ethical depth that we have to review. Thank you again for being here, and let's begin with this journey together. So, could you please show the next slide? Thank you. As we can see, the main purpose of this presentation will be to understand first the conflict of Myanmar, that I know that you have had the chance to speak about, but most importantly for now will be the introduction of the analytical framework into these different into the different variables of analysis that we have for this case, and the way we could develop better designing strategy responses through the analytical framework, which introduces mainly some indicators and components of international indices as the International Positive Peace Index, the Human Security Index, and some indicators of peace building. And through this approach, we will see how these kind of strategies, like combining international metrics for promoting progress towards more peaceful societies, could help us to get a better negotiation outcome and also to promote transformation. Next. First, I would like to show the basis of the analytical framework. As I said before, what I did basically was to take the Positive Peace Index that is measured by the Institute for Economics and Peace. I don't know, maybe you have had the opportunity to analyze it in depth, but if not, I will explain generally what it is about. And it's It's an index that tries to promote and invite also countries to improve their approaches and strategies in order to promote positive from the development perspective and the flourishment of society. So having the opportunity by the institute of measuring it annually allows countries to improve their strategies at national level in order to not only think about peace from the negative perspective, and when I say negative perspective, I'm talking about those strategies that are focused in reducing conflict and reducing violence and reducing direct crime, for example. But also, we need to think in when we talk about peace, we need to think in the development strategies and also the way we can interconnect the private public sector, reduce corruption, promote transparency, promote education, and also the development of the human rights approach into all the strategies from the from a cross-cutting perspective. That's why introducing a positive peace approach into a negotiation system could really lead into better outcomes, thinking in the middle and long term reports that we would like to have as countries. So now that I have also the opportunity to share with you the case of Myanmar, I would like also to tell you that in regarding the experience I have had in Colombia in some peace dialogues with the revolutionary armed forces, we have identified that, as the case of Colombia, as in any other international conflict that we could study, um, we can focus for the short term in the security area, but we really would like to across to have an analytical perspective, sorry, of the deep causes, root causes of the conflict. We need to think in the middle and long term results, and for doing so, it's important that the national strategies and the packages of negotiations could introduce a positive peace analysis into it. Besides, I have introduced an analysis of the Human Security Index. As you can see, I did the interconnection among positive peace, human security, and peace building for promoting stability in fragile states and highly contested context. And this should be implemented through a route map, starting by the planning stage, continuation in continuation with the implementation stage, and monitoring and evaluation. And for doing so, I introduced some analytical frameworks that have been used by international organizations. As you can see here, for example, the decision making approach, introducing a bottom up approach into it, inviting communities and inviting all the stakeholders to be part of the decision making process, and not thinking only in the strategies from the governmental perspective, or from the perspective of the international cooperation lines of action that we have introduced in our countries, that are of course very important, but always we need to consider the community opinion and the community suggestions and the community realities and needs that they could allow us to know in order to have a systemic result. Next. After analyzing the metrics, I identified the main components of them. So mainly what I did was a big analytical review in order to do a prioritization of components of the international metrics for fragile states and highly contested contexts. So as you can see in the Venn diagram that we have now on the screen, we have for the positive piece some components that are key and essential for this kind of context, human security components as well, and peace building. And I did three categories of analysis, A, B, and C, with a proposal that we can understand the progress towards more peaceful society with the development of the components that are located in the A part, as those that could allow us to fulfill positive peace approaches, human security, and peace building. B, those that are components that are shared by two analytical frameworks, and C, those that are unique from one of them. After developing this diagram, I designed a matrix, a big Excel matrix that includes some kind of basic analytical review for the low, medium, and high level of development of each one of the components that we can see on the screen, in order to adapt them into different policies or frameworks or strategies that any organization, government would like to use. I have had the chance of implementing this approach with the NDC of Colombia, with the National Determined Contribution of the country. So I designed some strategic lines of action, thinking on this analytical framework with the climate approach. Nevertheless, for the international conflicts, the main five lines of action that were um, conducted through this process are also going to be key in the smart city process that they are developing right now, with the international modelation of conflicts that we have. For example, the one they analyzed in Gaza, the one they are analyzing now with or in collaboration with your institute from Canada in Myanmar, and the one in Ukraine, or in other case study of countries that we would like to develop it. Next. So mainly we have five strategic lines of action that are defined in those five words. The first, it's about governance and transparency, considering that we can't develop a good the negotiation approach without developing or including strong minimum criteria and technical suggestions from the governance and transparency line of action. And that means that we have to include the different stakeholders on the conversation. So it's important to consider the way we are going to make them participants of the process, because it's not only about inviting them to participate, it's about identifying the best way to make their opinions and perspectives and suggestions included into the decision making process. Transparency, in order to share the process with all the stakeholders as we get new results with the negotiation phases. Sorry. The second line of action, it's about human rights and empowerment, considering that human rights is something that we have to think from the holistic approach, and it's not about thinking any policy, any package of negotiation, and any result without this systemic human rights analysis. The human security approach, with all the dimensions that it includes, and that means that we don't really need to only focus on the military security, but also in the economic security, the community security, personal security, and all of those that are a priority for the community and different stakeholders involved. Then we have sustainable development and positive peace perspective, with the analysis of the pillars of that are developed by the Institute for Economics and Peace, the A pillars. And finally, innovation and cohesion for capacity building, which is crucial, and it's in the center of everything, because we have identified, in the case of Colombia, for example, that could be a good example to follow for the case of Myanmar and other international conflicts, that without enhancing the capacities of the community, we are not going to get a good approach, because they could have good intentions, but not only with good intentions, we will have a peace accord or a peace outcome that could really have an impact in medium and long term. So regarding that, it's important that we invite them for capacity building strategies, not only through workshops, not only through explaining them what is the main purpose that we have for this big general negotiation strategy, but also trying to have some tables of negotiation or dialogues with them in order to identify their local needs and their priorities. And mostly of the international dialogues negotiation international dialogues for negotiation frameworks are identifying only needs and problems, but it's also important to identify the capacities that they already have and the contributions they could develop into the process, because mostly, for example, for the ethnical participation, they used to have solutions that they have already thought and should be considered in the governmental scenario or non-governmental scenario, depending to the stakeholders that are involved. Next. So, for the context and rationale, as I said before, I am sure that you have talked about this in previous webinars, and that's very important because Myanmar, it's a very complex situation or case to study, and I think that it's very interesting because in most of the global south countries we have also many issues and obstacles regarding the ethnical approach, and they are sadly involved in the consequences of the presence of armed conflict, and some in some case scenarios we have also identified that some members of ethnical groups like indigenous communities are being part of the armed forces in some countries. So that happens because we have root causes of the conflict, as I said before, and that's the reason why it's very important to try to develop a positive perspective on these case scenarios. So now that we have reframed peace a systematic and a living process, let me introduce the framework I developed to help make that vision actionable. Um, so we are gonna discuss about the impact of the developing of this approach into the Myanmar case scenario, considering the main focus of one of the groups that are involved into the conflict. So as you know, Myanmar is not facing a single issue conflict; it's navigating layers of fragmentation and ethnical tensions and territorial control disputes, democratic breakdown, military occupation, humanitarian crisis, and deep legitimacy fractures across institutions and communities. So, as we can see, not only for the case of Myanmar, but also in other cases as Gaza, traditional negotiation frameworks often fall short in these environments. Why? Because they treat conflict as a matter of symmetrical interest or and compromise, when in fact the very foundations of who holds power and who belongs and what legitimacy means are contested. That's why we need a framework that embraces complexity, not avoids it, and integrates both short-term needs and long-term transformation, connecting human security, governance, justice, and social cohesion in a single strategic logic. So then, as you can see on the screen, we are going to analyze the phases that I have where I have been contributing to the Smart Zero process of analysis. They already developed a big analysis with different packages as a proposal of negotiation. So as it was very well advanced, I decided to try to identify some minimum criteria and technical recommendations that could allow them to introduce some components into the framework or into the process they are developing for promoting progress towards more peaceful society, considering the framework that I just explained. So before we dive into how the peace progress framework has been applied to the Myanmar case, it's essential to understand that one of the key actors involved in both the real conflict dynamics and the smart city simulation process is the Tatmadaw. In the context of Myanmar, any effort to support negotiation or simulate peace building must address the role of the Tatmadaw and the country's official armed forces, that for decades has been more than a military actor, and they have shaped political life, controlled key sectors of the state, and they have been central to the Myanmar's contested governance structure. So its historical dominance and resistance to the democratic reform make the Talmud a critical stakeholder in any realistic scenario of transformation. And that's why, by assigning participations to simulate the Tatmadaw position in the smart city, could allow us to confront the real tensions and system and asymmetrics that we define the conflict. So, as we can see here, after developing the peace progress framework as part of my master research, as I explained at the beginning, I wanted to test its real world applicability. And Myanmar, with its complexity, fragility, and competing claims to legitimacy, provided the kind of environment where a strategic peace analysis could make a difference. So that I conducted a block by block analysis of the single negotiation framework proposed by Smart City, and I used this using four-step methodology that connected negotiation design with peace building substance. So first, the single negotiation framework block analysis uh, was developed, but as I said, with different phases and different packages of negotiation. So I started by assessing the purpose and the structure and the timeline of each negotiation block, with special attention to the Tamodel coded options. Second, the Tamodel preference review, where I looked at how the Tamodel has responded across simulations and what they accept and what they resist, and where ambiguity or openness remains. Third, the peace progress framework alignment. So for each block, I applied a five strategic lines of my framework, as I said before, based on the governance, human rights, sustainable development, human security, and innovation equation for capacity building. Finally, identified some opportunities of consensus. So I highlighted specific areas where the alignment was most likely and where language, sequency, or purpose could bridge positions and foster constructive transformation. And I also developed a time-based implementation roadmap to face the framework across the 10-year horizon, classifying blocks into four stages. So we have immediate actions where we can include humanitarian and ceasefire priorities, short-term actions with governance and inclusive dialogues, medium-term reforms and stabilization, and long-term with institutional deepening and transformation. And this roadmap was informed by the three criteria: urgency and humanitarian priority, logical sequencing and peace process, and political feasibility based on known data model patterns. So the updated version of the framework of the Smart City already reflects promising alignment, and particularly in its reconciliatory tone, through flexibility built into education and humanitarian provisions and the phased approach to institutional reform. And these are areas where I believe the peace progress framework and the smart city process are converging towards something powerful. And I remain fully committed to support the next iteration, so we can see the results coming. But I am truly convinced that this kind of actions and this kind of minimum criteria, considering the positive is human security and peace building through a sustainable peace that we would like to get, are completely important and necessary if we want real solutions. In the case of Myanmar and in the case of Colombia, we have identified that those processes, that are not thought in this kind of terms, are always going to extend the conflict and maybe to include or make it worse, and include more gaps and include more obstacles in the development of it. For example, nowadays we have a national strategy in Colombia, which name is Total Peace. So we can't talk about total peace because we are not going to have a real total peace in any country. But the intention is to promote peace dialogues with those armed forces that were not that didn't participate into the previous peace dialogues of 2016 and the peace accords of 2016. So we have now new groups, we have now new gaps, more obstacles, more root causes in the territories, and of course it's necessary to have a dialogue with them. But if we don't consider a serious way to do so, with an introduction of packages as Smart City has proposed, for example, which I think this is amazing, an amazing proposal that could be implemented in any country. And if we don't think in long-term solutions, we are not going to have any change and any transformation um, with the substance of the conflict. So that's completely important. And finally, in addition to the thematic phase analysis, I developed what we call a time-based implementation roadmap, as I mentioned before. So as we can see here, the roadmap is divided into 4 phases. First is the immediate phase with urgent humanitarian measures such as ceasefire mechanism, protection of civilians, emergency access that are prioritized here, and these are the non-negotiable foundations for de-escalation and trust building. So that's key. Second, short-term phase. This includes initiatives that can be quickly launched once violence subsidies such as inclusive dialogue platforms, initial educational reform, and transitional governance mechanism. And then we have a medium-term phase where we can envision more structured reform process such as the constitutional dialogue and justice mechanism, that are very important and very difficult also to develop. I know that we have um, intended many times in different countries to try to integrate a better justice mechanism, but it's maybe one of the main obstacles while we do not approach the transparency line or the reduction priority into our system. So that's, for example, one of the positive pillars, and that allow us to consider that anything will work in the way we want. At least we also consider at the same time or simultaneously the possibility of developing some anti or against corruption strategies. Long-term phase, finally, where we can have a deeper transformation that requires time, capacity, legitimacy, and in this way we can really think about institutional consolidation and reconciliation structures and sustainable development policies. This is a roadmap, very ambitious, but I think that it's better to have a high ambition when we have a negotiation process, and then during the development of the negotiation we can adapt the phases and we can see if we need more time in order to develop a deep analysis or having a deep conversation or dialogue in some of the strategic lines of action or some of the blocks of the negotiation. So it's better to do changes during than before, in order to avoiding having this kind of flexibility that sometimes could be not taken well by the armed forces or the stakeholders that are being part of the conflict. So sometimes when they see more flexibility, they can take advantage of improving their strategies, but on the opposite, for violence, for getting more results according to their own interests and so on. But when they have a very strict approach or process and roadmap with transparency, they are going to also trying to be more involved with more commitment into it. And this roadmap was built using three guiding criteria: the urgency, sequence, and feasibility, as I said. So I really consider that as we close today's sessions, I would like to leave you with a very concrete set of strategic recommendations that emerged from the full advisory analysis of the Myanmar single negotiation framework. So these recommendations reflect specific opportunities for alignment, for the alignment between the framework of the smart seal negotiation structure and the transformational objectives of peace building, as understood through international frameworks and localized realities. So the first is governance reform. This calls for phased institutional changes that can enhance transparency, accountability, and resilience. And in the case of Myanmar, sequencing reforms, rather than demanding them all upfront, can reduce friction and increase visibility. Second, we have reconciliation. So rather than confrontational or punitive measures, the proposal focuses on inclusive mechanisms that allow a dialogue and allow mutual recognition and space for dignity. And this could also enable constructive transformation without triggering defensive responses. Third, we have educational flexibility. Educational policy, as I also mentioned when I was talking about the positive peace approach, that we have this capacity building pillar. It's important to put also education in the middle or as one of the priorities of the process when overlay rigid and ideologically loaded and can reinforce division. So it's important to have a educational approach from the cross-cutting perspective. And the recommendation here is to allow greater flexibility in content, delivery, and language for the educational access. And finally, humanitarian response. This emphasizes adaptable and localized approaches that prioritize human security, particularly in ceasefire zones and displacement contexts. This action should come first and should remain insulated from political deadlock, so enabling immediate relief and confidence building. I consider that these four recommendations, clusters, governance, reconciliation, education, and humanitarian response, reflect both the technical alignment that we need to consider always with the political sensibility that is important to the decision making processes or scenarios. And they are meant to serve as entry points for consensus and foundations of deeper transformation in a fragile landscape. So each one of those that we can see are they are grounded in the five strategic lines of the peace progress framework, and they have been tested through the block level analysis and time-based implementation planning, or they have the intention of being tested. I mean, because we already have the criteria and they are going to be implemented in a simulation that we will have in September. So this session is it's important to show you how we can integrate the international metrics into very interesting frameworks that allow us to consider more variables of analysis when we negotiate for peace dialogues. But also, it's important to analyze or having a deeper analysis um, regarding the implementation phase of those. So we already have the packages, we already have the suggestions. When we are going to put it in practice, we could have many obstacles on it. And that's why in the next webinar, we are going to have a session very well focused on the implementation phase for of each one of the proposed phases that I have talked about or mentioned. So thank you very much for your attention, for your presence, and also for the commitment you have had with peace building process.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. These are wonderful slides and the concepts, I must agree. And what I would also request you that if you kindly allow us to share, because possibly of the technological matter here, these might not be very much visible through the live streaming. So if you agree, then we can share it in our website for the audience to have a deeper look into your models. So excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. Dear audience, we just attended the presentation of Maria, and she displayed a number of ideas, and quite interestingly, these are all graphical, so that it's easy to understand her thoughts. And tomorrow also we are going to listen to her in the next level. So today, now we are going to open for the Q&A session, and we have our founder advisor David Gerald Newman and our founder director Dr. Halal. So David, let me invite you first to have the question. Go ahead, sir.
As a Rotarian for a long time, and someone that sees the value of having Rotary Peace Fellows, that is, graduate students or mature students educated in conflict prevention and resolution at specialist levels by accredited universities. I'm deeply appreciative that we have Maria making this presentation today. Rotary, as many of you know in the audience, is a service above self-driven organization of business, professional, and community leaders with a very broad definition, because business can include micro enterprise practitioners, women in marketplaces, impoverished peoples working to survive. It can include everybody, children, women, all parts of our global human family. So when she speaks, as she does, about the kind of transformation that is needed, and she has a theoretical means which is being tested in practice to accomplish a vision for transportation to take place over a period of time. And she also makes the point very clearly that this is a never-ending work for every society. Once you accomplish what may be called a ceasefire or an end of immediate violent conflict, how do you sustain that? And how do you address the root causes in a sustainable way? And then be part of the big challenge of global humanity, and that is to save the human species from extinction, either by atomic weapons, climate change, dysfunctional governments, and misuse of power. So it is in that kind of context that I pose, first of all, a very big question. And maybe if you don't answer it today, maybe you'll answer it in your second session. But given we have the technological means, we have educated people like you and Kauser and Halal, and lawyers and experiential PhDs of learning, who are ordinary people who have learned through life in the crucible of real living how to do things well. How do we, as the civil society, which is the vast majority of the world, not the people that run it and make the decisions that either manipulate us or benefit us for good. How do we address, when you identify where the power is, the real power is, so it's in Tatmadaw and the military and others, but beyond that, it's in geopolitical ways, it's other countries in the world, it's China, it's United States, it's India, it's Thailand. I mean, it's other countries. and it is also multinational corporations, and it's people that have the wealth, the 1% plus of the world that really have the wealth control dominance and therefore influence and dependence of employees and contractors, and in other words, those that they successfully suppress often for their own benefit. So the question is, how do we, through this kind of means, smart, settle, infinity, and your way of amplifying that, enhancing that with human security and positive peace, how do you, through track 3 kinds of simulated diplomacy, right? How do you therefore ultimately gain an effective way of resisting that dominant power, which can be used, and I'm sure was used in Colombia. I know it's been used in Canada. That dominant power to suppress, right? To react in often violent ways, right? And use that power to shut it down. How do you address that without using that kind of power, but using what is the soft power of credible people, rational people, educated people, well-meaning, good faith people, coming up with solutions based on sophisticated, transparent analysis and processes that you represent. So my question simply is, how can we, when this process is utilized, and the peoples of the Myanmar and the peoples of the region have a voice, and women have a voice, and the environment has a voice, children have a voice through this kind of process. How does that result? How can that result in the transformation of the people to actually listen rather than suppress?
I love this question. Thank you, David. I would like to tell you the answer from the experience we are having right now this year in Colombia. We are developing a participatory approach for updating the NDC of the country, which is going to define the national determined contribution of the country for the next 5 years. And all the countries in the world have to do this year. So they have to upload their NDCs at the UNFCCC system. Nevertheless, I have identified that in some cases, not all the countries develop a very open and deep participatory approach. And this is just an example of the kind of scenarios or experiences that could result or could have a result that we don't want, and is that at the end communities are going to feel that they are not being part of the decision making processes. Communities can identify or feel that somehow the policies do not represent their priorities, are not really having an impact on their gaps and necessities. And it's like the first invitation of building development, peace strategies, anything that we want to do, not, as you said, not only from the governmental level, but also civil society, non-governmental level, is super important. Very, very important that when we have that intention, and we have a clear purpose, and we want to create something, could be a strategy, could be a project, could be a policy, anything from non-governmental and governmental sectors, we need to hear, or at least try to hear, most of the communities of the countries. So having a differential approach, as you said, including children, including women, including indigenous communities, farmers, Afro-descendants, everybody in the conversation, because they don't have the same perspective, they don't have the same gaps, and they don't have also the same scenarios, economic scenarios, socioeconomic scenarios. So when we plan something with a technical team, sitting down with many experts and computers, because we have had that experience with this process of the NDC, we could try to analyze what could be the solutions, but then we have the participatory approach, and then we go to the territories and we hear something completely different, and we can hear that the indigenous community say something like, oh, we already have that. You don't know. Well, maybe you don't know because the civil society are helping us with that, and that is not what we need. We need something else. So then that invite us to think that long-term peace solutions, and a real and deep transformation, starts always by listening. It starts always by including, and it starts always by a bottom-up approach. That's very important, and the way we include them, it's also key, because it's not only, as I said, about inviting them to some scenarios or some dialogues without thinking in advance very well, and with a huge level of detail, what we want to conduct in the conversations, because the societies and communities and the countries, we have many conflicts and many gaps to solve, many obstacles to solve. But at the end, if we organize them with different agendas, if the civil society has a clear focus on a specific project, for example, or strategy of action, if we identify mm, what do we need from the community, what do we need from the stakeholders, we can conduct the conversation in a better way and with a proper methodology. So thinking about methodologies for the participatory approach is also important, and adapting those methodologies to an easy language to understand. For example, we can't know talk about I don't know, using a very technical language when we are conducting a conversation with them for identifying the real needs, and having this connection and harmony between the private, public sector, the non-governmental sector, with the inclusion of civil society. Civil society has a key role for trust building, because we can identify and see that everywhere. Because when I am in international negotiations for the UNFCCC, I have identified that civil society has a very important role for trust building, and they always could serve as a bridge between the community real needs and priorities and the decision making scenarios. And at the end, civil society could serve and help and contribute in this way with best impact, because at the end, without having those bridges, we are not going to have any kind of incidents in the final outcomes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
Dr. Hilal, if you have any questions, please.
Thank you very much, Maria. I just need to know about who builds the cat, about the leader, who is taking the lead, and how we choose the leader, especially the facilitator, because we have diplomats, political, negotiators, those who are formal, institutionalized professionals for negotiation in peace building. They have different approach. They have very technical sort of approaches of their own. We are talking about people-centered approach, like participatory approach. So where do you stand, especially non-structured, non-formal mediators, non-formal facilitators? Where do we stand? Whether we really have any place in any kind of peacemaking? Like, okay, sometime we invite civil society people, we invite other stakeholders, but they're so disjointed. How can we simplify it, especially whether we get real proper significance uh, to the negotiators, or we are just sidelined all the times, just sit here whenever we see you're worth, you are important, we will be inviting you, these sort of situations. How can we informal people can become you know outspoken voice, real voice that can make change, and real facilitators and real mediators?
Very important question. Thank you, Dr. Helal. So I consider that when we talk about empowerment, which is very, very, very difficult to get, it is one of the key challenges that we have in all the conflict agendas. Empowerment, social empowerment. Mm, Maybe we are not going to have total informal stakeholders or participants totally empowered at the end of a process, even if we try, but we can do our best to try to promote capacity building with them if we have them to have a role in the negotiations. I have seen, sorry, that when we have different stakeholders, it's important that those that are representing civil society, observers, uh, armed revolutionary armed forces, for example, or ethnical groups, community groups, governmental participants, international humanitarian participants, because they also have a key role. It's important that first, before coming to the peace dialogue or they start a negotiation in a very specific agenda, first they need to define or identify in their internal structure the way they are going to have a better representation. Because as an example, 3 days ago, I was with indigenous communities in Nipiales, in a specific zone of Colombia where we have the presence of armed conflict and many other obstacles. And communities, some women that were participating there, they said those that the government recognizes as our voices and our leaders, they do not represent us. So if we don't have that kind of internal decision making and the decision the definition, sorry, of those that are really going to be the representatives with legitimacy of some communities or civil society sector or observers, any stakeholder that we want, we are not going to have, even though a good outcome, and also totally consensus among parties and a real implementation. Because it's important to take that kind of decisions internally. So, for example, at government, in a governmental instance, not everybody is allowed to participate. But why? Because maybe the planning strategy is having some lags in terms of who are the sectors, or what are the sectors, sorry, that need to be included into the agenda of development. So then once we include in the planning session or in the planning phase the identification of the critical sectors, we can say, okay, we need a representative from the environmental sector, we need a representative from the security, from the justice and the educational sector for this agenda of, or this deliberation of the 3 or 4 main packages of negotiation. So once we do that, once we speak with the sectors, when we identify who can get the better approach to develop each one of the agendas, we will define from that perspective, from the governmental area, who could attend to the negotiation. And in the case of the observers and civil society, is the same. So civil society also has an structure and a top-down approach. Uh, but it's important to consult before coming to the negotiation. So consult internally and identify what is going to be our purpose as civil society. Are we going to serve as bridge for what? Are we going to be on the clear defense of what, so identify our priorities, talk internally, and come in there. And the same with the community. With the community, maybe it's very, very difficult with no formal participants, because as I said, they don't feel that those who are the current leaders could really represent them. But I think that it's key that the coordination team could be a table with a representative of the government, a representative of international organizations, could be a team. They could be very clear with the leaders of the community that the only way to participate is demonstrating that they already have consulted through participatory approaches internally or in their groups. I mean, there are many ways to do so. For example, in the case of indigenous communities, they have some national platforms, but local communities don't feel that those national platforms works. Why? Because the national platforms are not consulting to them before coming to the national tables and speak on behalf of everybody in Colombia, all the national communities in Colombia. That's the case of my country. So we have seen that, and maybe the problem is that the platforms are not consulting. So that's why maybe we can be more strict. We can have the obligation or the commitment for a peace negotiation dialogue, that all the participants have a participatory approach, and in order to make it clearer, and maybe in order to develop a better governance strategy and transparency. So also in doing so, it's better maybe to guide them, because they could consider that in the way they are developing everything, it's perfect, but when it's not. So if we can see or identify the better way to guide them into this governance strategy for having a better participatory approach before coming to the table of negotiation, we will have a better representation, a better planning phase, and a better development of the agenda.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we are just at the end of our session. Planned session is 1 hour mark, but I would like to show one question that I think is important from the audience who tuned in our YouTube channel. And Madara Diaz is our intern from Masters of Human Rights program from University of Manitoba. She has posed this question: what will be the role of international and regional mediators in your recommended process for the negotiation of peace? So I think she's trying to understand what do you see. I mean, from the outer, external side, because there's always a problem of trust and not knowing the local dynamics. This is what we are talking about in Myanmar. So, what is your take on that?
Uh, Main advice or main suggestion is always to promote transparency into the process. So the mediators from the who are representing the international scenario or the regional scenario need to demonstrate that everything they are discussing or they want to discuss is completely neutral and is completely focused on the main aim of the negotiation process. So we cannot see that any mediator is trying to put more benefits into one of the stakeholders, for example, for one of them, like advocating more from for one, but promoting injustice with the others. If we want to defend something, if we want to defend a group, or if we want to defend a purpose, we always need to demonstrate that that is our key priority. Of course, that but we are open to hear all the other interests in order to put everything into a balance and create a better scenario of discussion. We are always going to have very bad results if we see that the mediators are taking part only benefits for some parties.
Oh, I think is a very important aspect. David, did you have one more question?
I would just add to that, because a great answer and an absolutely great question. And there's not enough appreciation, because what we see on CNN and TV, popular TV and stuff, mediation, the role is just to be a neutral facilitator, to make sure everyone is equally heard and valued, and interests are expressed, and even appropriate expertise is brought to the table. But what I wanted to add is the wonderful thing about Smart Settle Infinity, which is being used as a tool by facilitators, I might say, like Maria, is really using even the feared artificial intelligence in a way, and when you think of it as augmented intelligence, so the ability to access global data, publicly available data, and bring it into really into the multi-stakeholder negotiating process to add value, add additional information that all benefit from, right? That is the beauty of it. So when you have a neutral tool that amplifies the quality professional mediation, you've got something which can be a wonderful means forward if it is understood properly, and the appropriate trust is built at the beginning, and then it is utilized authentically and sincerely by the participants to get to yes, yes, yes. And that means, of course, a consensus agreement based on the identified and chosen issues to be addressed. So thanks very much for that question.
Thank you, David. I think we are going to reflect upon what Maria presented today, and also during the discussion from the questions from David and Dr. Halal. These are all very much, I would say, instructive to understand the process itself and how really you balance power. And here's an example that Maria herself undergoing in Colombia, and she has shared some of the very intimate knowledge on the processes itself that unfolds when you go on the ground. And we are going to learn more actually from her perspective. And Maria is a Rotary Peace Fellow from University of Bradford, and her developed the thematic ideas of conflict transformation and peace building. What we are trying to adapt for our project might be interesting in the future as well. The audience, with this, I'll conclude tonight's session, but do tune in tomorrow at the same time, 6 p.m. Central. Maria is going to present her second part, and we are going to also listen a kind of expanded knowledge and ideas from her field work and her experience. And please do tune in, and we are going to possibly have another wonderful session tomorrow. And thank you very much, those who tuned in. Thank you very much, David and Dr. Halal, for sparing your weekend time with us. We beg apology for holding you back an hour plus 6 minutes here with us. But I think it's very important that we engage the speaker so that we extract more from the presenter. The audience, keep being with us in this project, and we are going to hold many more in the future to understand various aspects of the conflict transformation in our this project. And also, I'd like to share today that our planned in-person 2 days long seminar is going to be taking place on 26th of and 27th of September in University of Manitoba, Hanley Hall, St. Paul's College. And we have already started publishing in our social media sites. One thing is we are inviting graduate students to concentrate in signing up for an essay competition, and there are prizes built in there. And also we are inviting as facilitators people to kindly sign up for our second day 27 September workshop that Smart Settle Infinity is going to be conducting, including Maria. So please do follow those announcements, and we'll be very happy to invite you and see you on 26th of September. And finally, I would like to also just repeat the initial message that I sent today. Manitoba is in distress. We are going through one of the largest evacuation in the history after the Red River flood. So wherever you are, whatever capacity you have, please do join hands in solidarity to help other Manitobans from your platform. We'll deeply appreciate, and this institute stands always in solidarity with fellow Manitobans and around the globe. Thank you so much for tuning in and for listening to this wonderful presentation by Rotary Peace Fellow Maria Cristina Cifuentes. Have a nice rest of the evening. Goodbye.